Hello and welcome to today's episode of On the Line with ZYouth. My name is Derek Crawford and I'm the youth pastor at Zion Lutheran Church in Clear Lake, Iowa. Let me give you a quick rundown to those who are new to this space. Over the next few minutes, we are going to explore some areas and topics of Christianity, then break them down a little bit and hopefully apply them back to our daily lives. Let's check it out. So today I'm going to start the second part of this series on the Kingdom of Heaven. The last video, I used a deck of Uno cards, similar to these, and gave a brief introduction to what the Kingdom of Heaven is. But before we explore this topic further, I think we need to gain some context to really understand what is going on. And so Matthew is the first gospel presented in the Bible, meaning if you read it from beginning to end, Matthew would be the first gospel you come upon. And it has this distinct responsibility of bridging the Old Testament to the New Testament. So it is that first book that introduces the New Testament and kicks it off. So at that time, people would have been reading the Old Testament. That's what they would have been used to. And once the Gospels were written, this is the first book that kind of kicks it off. And so I think it's a very important placement for the book of Matthew, and it has a big task ahead of it. But what it does is the book of Matthew attempts to accomplish this task of establishing the genealogy of Jesus by connecting him back to Abraham through King David. And Matthew spends a large section of its time highlighting the prophecies that were fulfilled through Jesus. And it kind of helps establish this idea of Jesus as king, that he's taking over and that he's going to be the new ruler, the new head. But it's going to look differently than what I think we tend to expect. And the other significant aspect of Matthew is that it kind of uses this kingdom language. He would continue reference and describe the kingdom of heaven. The kinglish established by Jesus in the book of Matthew is so different than anything that humanity has ever experienced. It's kind of off-putting in a way. And every step of the way, it seems as though Jesus' ministry seems to be defining these new rules, as I was talking about last week. He keeps setting up what the rules look like and how things are going to look a little bit differently. And so in the last video, I encouraged you to read the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. And this is very unique because it's the beginning of 5 discourses. So basically there's 5 sections of the book of Matthew. And this takes place relatively early in the ministry of Jesus. And it's the longest continuous teaching of Jesus in the New Testament. And what's also unique about the Sermon on the Mount is that it is unique to the book of Matthew. You don't find it, you might find parts of it, but you don't find it in the other Gospels. And so to set the scene a little bit, Jesus has been baptized by John the Baptist. He's finished his fasting and meditation retreat in the desert and has begun to preach in Galilee. And it begins with a section called the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. And I actually want to read that to you today because I think it's that important that you understand that even as early as the 5th chapter in the book, this is what it finds important. After it's established the beginning of Jesus' ministry, this is what the author found important. So starting with verse 1, "Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will seek God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.'" I want to stop for a second and I want you to kind of reflect on those words. Let them sink in a little bit. To me, it feels like everything that is said in that is so far from the culture we live in today. And Jesus is showing us that this is the new way of living. And it just feels like it stands in such contrast to the norms set by culture, both in the day that this was written and in modern times that we live in right now. But in this, it's fun because the Sermon on the Mount, he covers such a wide range of topics. He talks about murder, divorce, adultery, revenge, loving enemies, keeping your word, giving generously, leaning on prayer, fasting, heaven. He talks about fear, judging others, and many other topics. And if you look at each one, a pattern starts to form and starts to take shape. He takes common held beliefs or common things held to culture, and he starts to show how God is seen through them. He starts to take these topics and teaches how they really should live out, how they really should play out in modern contexts. And often this pushes against what people think of at that time, or at least what they held to be true. And this sets up a lot of tension because leaders of this time start to push back. And I think it's really interesting if we were to put ourselves in this position, if we were to think about what is going on here, the type of environment he's setting up. And I think it's very interesting. And I think by the end of this series, I'm hoping that it kind of starts to shine a light on this, is that, humans think it should be this one thing. They think it should be this original game of Uno. But in reality, Jesus is coming and saying, no, it's going to look a lot like this. It's going to be based on humility. It's going to be based on the things that he established in those Beatitudes. And it's a much kinder world than I think we live in today. And I think that's going to play out as we move on, as we continue through this. But that's where I'm going to stop today, because again, I promised to keep these things short. But next week, next video, we're going to start discussing the tension that is seen through Jesus, the pushback he starts to get. And I think that's very interesting as well, because I think it goes very much in line with what culture shows. And so if you want to follow along and you want to read along, we're going to be jumping to the Matthew chapter 18 through 19. And so it's a little bit of reading, but if you want to follow along with me, that's kind of where we're headed. And so here's some reflection questions that I want you to think about. And again, answer them in the comments below if you feel like it, and start a discussion on this type of thing. But here's the question. Do you ever get the chance to read the Bible? And if you do, is it like, do you work through complete chapters? Like, do you go through the whole chapter, or do you work through the whole book? Or are you the kind of person that just reads individual verses? Like, basically, how do you experience the Bible? I want to know. The next question is, how do you respond when hearing the Beatitudes? How does that make you feel when what Jesus is describing here? Like, what emotions does it bring up? Because to me, it brought up a lot. It made me think about how I act, how I treat others, and I think that's pushing us in the direction we need to go. And then the final question is, what are some of the ways we can approach life with more humility? I think that's kind of the thing that you can get from the Beatitudes, is that it's a humbling section of verses. And so what does that look like? What does that look like to be humble in your setting, in your particular case, and especially at home? Like, can you be humble at home? Can you treat your brothers and sisters with humility? Can you treat your parents through a heart of humility? That about wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for checking us out. Remember that it takes a lot to put everything on the line for Jesus, but I promise you it's worth it. Until next time, blessings to you.